This episode of Drinking on the Edge is not happening at the Radio Free Rhinecliff station. It's being self-produced by myself and my sometime co-host, Carlo DeVito. Hello, Carlo.
Hello.
And it's taking place at another noteworthy name and location, Branchwater Farms, which is the home of Kevin Pike and his partner, Robin Touche. Kevin and Robin appeared in recent times on our podcast as well. Kevin's appeared talking about Swiss wines with Dr. Jose Villamose. Hello, Kevin.
Hello.
We're here to talk about the subject of currant, and that's C-U-R-A-N-T, the currant, the fruit, and its development, lack thereof, and current availability, which has been quite remarkable. The stories behind it with four remarkable folks here in the Hudson Valley, and inasmuch as Carlo is acquainted with a couple of these key fellows and has a working history with one of them, I'm going to let him begin our conversation about the history and the foundation of currant in that. Carlo.
Currants have made a big comeback here in the Hudson Valley, and we're lucky enough to have two of the people who were really important in bringing currants back. Currants had been banned growing here in New York State, largely due to the efforts of the lumber industry back at the turn of the previous century. And Greg Quinn is our man on the spot. He was the person who really turned over that law and began a whole new generation of both winemaking and juice making here in the Hudson Valley. And he was assisted by Stephen Casscles, who at the time worked in the New York State Senate and worked with the lawmakers there. Greg, when did you start trying to do this?
So I started in early 2003, late 2002, and I was looking for, my wife and I had recently bought the farm, and I was looking for something to grow on it, something other than the mainstay of corn and apples and hay. And I looked into ginseng and garlic and different things, and I happened to visit a local vintner, Clinton Vineyards, who was making cassis. And I have a horticultural and a botanical background. I taught at the New York Botanical Garden, so I knew they were outlawed. And I said to him, where do you get your currants? And the vintner, Ben, became a great friend. He said, it's a pain in the butt. I got to bring them in from Canada, and because they're illegal. And so that's a little light bulb went off, and that was the beginning.
And so how did you come into contact with Steve, and how did you go about, because that's a difficult thing that you were trying to over, was this, I guess, a sort of bias or prejudice against the fruit?
Well, I did a little bit of research, and I found out that the law that was actually an act of Congress in 1911, and the science behind the ban was not that sophisticated as you can imagine back then. And so I did a little research with some colleagues up at Cornell University, some pathologists, and they basically all concurred that currants, first of all, there's new varieties that aren't as susceptible to this disease. There's different controls, and that they could probably be grown safely within the confines of using some of these new, more advanced varieties and so forth. And with that under my arm, I thought, wouldn't it be cool if I could change the law? And I started going up to Albany. How does one change a law? I had no idea. I'm not a lawyer. And I started going up to Albany, and I sat down with one legislator up there, the first one, and he took out his legal pad and said, how big is the market? And I said, well, there is no market. It's illegal. And he said, that's not good news. Of course, he's asking how many farmers and how many voters. And he said, how many farmers? And I said, there's no farmers because it's illegal. And he said, we got a lot on our docket, and it's too busy. And I started going up to Albany every week to see if I could get with somebody. I started bringing boxes of Danish pastry to sneak me in with the law clerks and the secretaries when the senator or the assemblyman had a cancellation. And after going up there for a long time, got a call from the Wall Street Journal, a fellow who had the beat up there, and he said, we'd like to do an article. And they did an article in the Wall Street Journal. And that's when Senator Larkin, with whom Steve was working, called me up the next day after the article came out and said, hey, this is really interesting, let's talk.
And what year was that?
That was in 2000, the end of 2002, I think.
So we're at 2002. Steve, why don't you tell us a little about where it went from there?
I'm now retired, but I was a counsel in the New York State Senate for 33 years. And I was working for Senator Larkin, but I was also working quite a bit because I'm very friendly with Senator Salan, who's a senator from this area. So as Greg had said, what occurred was I saw this article in the New York and the Wall Street Journal about this. So I called them up and then started trying to talk more about this situation. The other thing is that my background is where our family's from the Hudson Valley for a long time. So we have and continue to grow currants. So we didn't know the fact that they were in fact illegal. So it's weird how that worked out. Then we met and then we talked about how to draft the bill. We drafted it in such a way so it wouldn't go through the Environmental Conservation Committee because people in NCON don't like these kinds of concepts. So we drafted it so it went to the Agriculture and Markets Law Committee. So then went to that committee, and that just made it a lot favorable. The other thing that was a real plus is that during that period of time, and again, this is early, I think 2002, is that the governor at the time was Georgi Pataki, who's a Hungarian, I'm Hungarian, who grew basically currants and other fruits in the Peekskill area. So when I talked to him about this situation, he was like, that was stupid. And he just never, so he understood that. So we already had people in the administration who were very favorably disposed to us. So after that, working with Greg, we spent our time like talking to Farm Bureau and trying to get support for the bill. We drafted away so it went to committees that were very favorably disposed to doing it that way. And then once it got to the desk of the governor, we actually had not a bill signing, but I came to him afterwards and thanked him for doing all the work that way. So it was that way. But again, my background is mostly healthcare financing, but at that time, when I worked for Senator Larkin, who's the representative from the Newburgh area, we had created something called the Hudson Valley Fruit. It was a task force for Hudson Valley fruit growers. This fit into this, and this is actually one of maybe 40 bills that were drafted, of which 30 became law. And this is one of those. We had the machinery going together already as far as drafting things, putting things together, and doing it that way. I think. Anything else?
Where was that passed?
I think it was passed in the laws of 2003.
And I'm curious, so it happened rather rapidly from Greg's initial pushback. Was there any opposition to in that year to having it passed?
Yes. It probably took about 2 years, as I remember, because the state Environmental Conservation Department did not like this at all because they don't like the idea of faulty science. But the theory is that currants basically have a fungus on them, which is a bluster rust. And what happens is, if you have white pines, what happens is it gets on the currant plants, it incubates, it goes to the white pines, then it kills the white pines. So the fear was at that point was that by having currants, that would be the host plant that would then have this rust fungus. That was the fungus, which would then kill white pines. And then we tried to prove that. In fact, in the State Museum to this day, there is still an exhibit of red currants and how they give this rust and how they kill these pines. So I've been talking to them to try and get rid of that, or at least update that exhibit. So that's it. Thanks for the question.
Was it lumber interest as well as the environmental department, or is it just the government?
Lumber a little bit. It was really mostly the inertia that it's been around since 1912. So what's the problem? Why makes sense? Why risk the fact that you're going to kill all these white pines for this thing where there's no crop, there's no market, and no one's growing them? So you do it that way. But at my house, and what I do now is I'm retired, but I have a fruit farm called Cedar Cliff Vineyards, and I work for a winery called Deer Native Grapes. So I grow a fair amount of currants right now, and during that time, in the early 2000s, I was growing currants. But I noticed that the farm that I bought had wild currants growing next to white pine. So I'm saying, if they were bad, they seem to be getting along pretty well that way. So I wasn't concerned about...
Let's see, and just point of reference, where is your farm located?
Oh, it's in Athens, New York. Okay. So it's near Catskill.
And Greg, how about you? Were you farming?
So we have a farm in Clinton, and it's where we started and where we're doing. I have a couple of other small properties that I also manage currants on, but the main farm is in Clinton.
How many acres are the two of you growing at this time?
I've got about 25 acres altogether that I've got currants on, and so...
I don't really grow a lot of currants. I specialize mostly in heritage grape varieties, of which I have now 87 different varieties. But what I do is I have about a half acre of currants, and I grow them underneath traditionally in the Hudson Valley, you had mixed fruit farming. So what you did was you put different things in the same property. So underneath my grape plants, I have currants. So I do it that way. So I have about a half an acre.
Okay, and is there a particular type or types of currants that you prefer, both of you, Steve?
I have mostly red varieties, and I have one white variety. Varieties you've probably never heard of, like Wilder and Lat. So those are the two that I have.
And for you, Greg?
I mainly grow black currants. Black currants are the big gun of the industry because they're of the health benefits. They're unbelievably healthy, antioxidants, anthocyanins, that sort of thing. And when I started growing these, because it didn't exist, I had to bring in some plants from Canada. And we brought in a variety of plant called Titania. And Titania basically was not a great cropper, didn't produce a lot of fruit, had a weird little characteristic where every few years the flavor of the fruit would be bitter as opposed to tart, which, as you all know, is a much different thing. And so I've been going back and forth to Poland for many years, and I now have the exclusive rights for all the Polish patented varieties for North America. And that's what we're growing on the farm now. We've ripped out all of our Titania, and we have many different varieties of the Polish varieties, which are far superior in taste and cropper and disease resistance and just a whole variety of things.
The currants that you do grow, how much goes into your own products versus do you sell any off to any of the local businesses or regional businesses around the state?
We have a lot of stuff. We have 15 products that we make, and it goes into those 15 products. But we also sell a lot to ingredient folks like Uta and Kevin here. And we have a fairly robust market with ciders, alcoholic ciders, and meads, and draft breweries, and as well as some distillery. Not a big deal. And some wineries as well.
Yeah, before I pass it over to Steve again, he was motioned over me, wants to say something else. Greg, I'm excited about you working with Polish varieties. Having been born and raised in Chicago, with a 2/3 Polish background, I got some familiarity with Polish foods, and I knew that Poland was big on currants, having tasted many imported Polish currant products over the years. So I'm really excited to see what you got coming out of that later on. Steve, you had something else to add?
Yeah, just something real quick. I was going to say one of the benefits, where I work at the Cedar Cliff nursery, I probably had different grape varieties and like heritage ones. But one thing that I'm very impressed about and happy about is I'm trying to identify heritage grape varieties and other fruits which can be grown sustainably, and currants are something that can be really grown sustainably. My experience is with both black and red currants is that they're very fungus disease resistant, so you don't have to spray them. The wildlife doesn't like them. So like with grapes, you have to net them and do whatever. With currants, you don't have to do that. The other thing too, it's good in a mixed fruit farm because what happens is you can put them with your grapes, and also they ripen like around 4th of July weekend. So you can have a crop that you've already picked in July making something, as opposed to if you're an apple grower, they all come in within about a 3-week period of time, or maybe a 4-week period of time. I grow grape varieties that start in Labor Day, go all the way till say the middle of October. But my currants, when I'm really quiet time, I can pick currants and then make cassis in July, and then process that and then have that done, say, in September or so. So it's a plus that if you want to have a mixed fruit farm, it's disease resistant, fungus disease resistant. You can grow them sustainably, but more importantly, it's in the downtime, so you can pick them and do it that way. And they're very easy to grow, so they're good that way. So thank you.
No, I think the early harvesting certainly is a benefit, especially when it goes into, as often happens with juices, into a concentrate, because it's at a time when a lot of the concentrators are not doing anything else. And it's a benefit in that respect. So.
Let's use that as a perfect segue into tasting your currant juice that you brought along with us today. So you're talking about, your black currant drink. Is this commercially available?
Yes, it's available in many outlets throughout the Hudson Valley, and we sell nationwide through our website.
CurrantC brand.
CurrantC.
Black currant nectar.
Black currant nectar. And yeah, this was actually our original product. When we got the law changed, first harvest, this is what we made. And we've added other products to it, but this is the flagship. Yeah.
And you just mentioned it was 37%?
37% juice. It's a kind of a complicated formula that they come up with that. But it's the highest amount of actual black currants in a ready-to-drink juice in the world. There are some concentrates to which one would add water or whatever. But as far as a ready-to-drink beverage, we're pretty proud of it. It's got a nice tart, sweet blend. It's got that nice tart aftertaste. And as I was saying, the American palate's kind of a sweet palate. But this was our compromise to have a sweet enough to be mass market and tart enough to really bring out the characteristic of currants. Yeah,
it's got a beautiful balance. I'm not much of a fruit juice drinker these parts of my adult life, but I like this quite a bit and use it. And Kevin was just mentioning the two of you put together a cocktail with this Cointreau and Kevin's gin.
I was just saying that this show doesn't do too much with fruit juices, so this is not an alcoholic beverage. However, if you accidentally spilled some of Kevin's gin in it, followed by another accident of Cointreau, it makes a really wonderful cocktail.
The aforementioned Ute that Kevin had dropped is Ute Londrigan, who's here from Heimat, current producer in Westchester County. Ute, can you share with us your journey into currants, how it is you came about this, and how Heimat is known for its currant beverages?
I'm not a currant producer. I'm a cassis maker, or let's say I'm the owner of Heimat, New York. We are a distillery out of Mamaroneck, New York, and we focus only on liqueurs. So we make liqueurs out of 3 ingredients. We source all our fruits from local farms. We use a whey-based spirit, which is distilled for us upstate, and organic cane sugar. Most people, when they think about a liqueur, they think about sweet, syrupy, and artificial, and all our liqueurs are everything else than that. We keep the sugar content to a bare minimum, and yeah, they're delicious in many different ways. We started in 2018 and started working with different farms. And I'm very familiar with currants. I grew up in Germany, and we had red currants, which we would eat covered in sugar. We had black currants as jellies or syrups. And when I moved to the US in 2015, I started working with all the fruits I saw, but there were not many currants around. And all of a sudden, we just moved into our new facility. And I think back in the days, we had 5 liqueurs. Yeah, I got a call from CurrantC, from Greg Quinn, and they told me, yeah, we read about you and we would like to work with you. And so I was like, oh, cool, great. I've been actually looking for currants. And so they sent me samples of red and black currants. We did some sample batches and launched the year after. And so our black currant liqueur is available like all our other liqueurs in New York. We ship directly in New York, but we're also available in New Jersey, California, and Illinois, and Washington, D.C. Yeah.
Distribution for your cassis and other liqueurs through wholesale distribution in other states as well. How has the response been to your current products, to your liqueurs here within the state, where your home market, versus that of versus that of the export markets of DC, California, and such?
I have to say that all our liqueurs, people, as I said before, when somebody hears liqueur, it's first, but once they try it, they are blown away by the taste, because my goal is to capture the fruit in the bottle. And currants, people know currant, but they usually, and no offense, but usually in the US, they think about dried raisins, and then they try it, and then all of a sudden the familiar taste of a cassis comes up, and people love it, absolutely love it. We actually sent in our black currant liqueur for the Good Food Awards, which is a national competition, not even competition, but all products which are sustainably produced, and we won the Good Food Awards this year, and also our currant liqueur got 93 points through the tasting panel. So it's very nice awards, and it's very much liked throughout the industry and even throughout the states.
You've mentioned the issue of sustainability. It came up earlier in conversation. To what extent do you view currants as able to embrace this great phrase for marketing in its actuality and in terms of its saleability? I guess I want to hear from you and Greg about this.
I'm not going to say this for currants. I'm just going to say it for per se. I think the entire world, and let's say the US, everybody is in for sustainability, and everything we do is to source locally wherever we can, and to have everything available from everywhere is just not really sustainable. And I think we should source from where we live. And there's just so much we can do with like simple ingredients. You don't need much to create something beautiful. And when you talk to farmers here who are doing a phenomenal job, everywhere they do, but here from my job, for everything we do at Heimat, I think sourcing locally and talking to the farmers and have a good connection with them is everything we can do. And that's what sustainability is for. Keep it local.
As Steve mentioned before, currants are relatively easy to grow from the standpoint, certainly, of diseases and insects. There's really only two main diseases that we've stumbled across, both of which we can get control and keep control. I'm a beekeeper, so we're not spraying anything on our crops and so forth. They're very mindful of that. And currants, really, they're unique. The taste of currants is unique. In fact, it's one of the descriptors when people are describing a red wine is black currants, because nothing tastes like a black currant. Nothing tastes like a plum. Nothing tastes like a cherry. All these descriptors are things that are incredibly unique, and that's the case with black currants. And so the flavor, once it's incorporated into many of these things, into Uta's product, into Kevin's, which we'll try in a bit, it's just really unique and really quite wonderful. And that's why I'm so excited about it. And it's been a fun journey.
Talking about production of these things and the sustainability issue, and bounce it back to Carlo, who isn't doing anything at the moment, but he had a good history of doing that back at his Hudson Chatham days.
I was going to say one of the things that is really important to understand is that Greg, with the help of Steve, really changed the game as to what was going on. So firstly, Greg came out with his juice, and then there were a whole slew of distilleries and wineries that followed almost immediately. Clinton, of course, was there at the beginning using outside fruit, but then you had places like Warwick Valley, and you had Towsey Winery, and even we at Hudson Chatham, by 2010, 2012, there were about 6 or 7 wines or distilled products made from currants in the valley. And obviously some of the producers have changed over the years, but the valley continues to produce really good black currant or cassis products. And having made them, there's a bunch of different ways to make a cassis product, whether you're using the original fruit and you're going to make a wine or something from that, or to make a tincture where you would take the fruit and submerge that in a wine or an alcohol-based neutral grain spirit or a brandy to make theirs. There were a bunch of different people doing it different ways. One of the things that I always found hilarious about currants, which is the same thing that a lot of people feel about rye whiskey, is that it gets goopy very quickly when you're trying to press it or make a wine out of it from the actual fruit. Have you had a lot of problems dealing with that when you're pressing juice, etc.?
No. I'm trying to think of a really long-winded answer for you, but it hasn't been an issue for us. Again, we don't get involved in any of the alcoholic aspect of it, but with regards to just, and what we do, which is true with most juices, is we make concentrate, and it just because it's more stable. A single strength juice is great, it's wonderful, but it's got a very short shelf life, and it's just not practical, especially when the market is still growing. There's still a whole lot of people that don't know what black currants are.
There's no question, though. Certainly, we used to make it over at Hudson Chatham, and it was immensely popular. We couldn't make enough of it. We made it in small batches. Back in those days, it was pretty tough for us to get New York State currants. There was a limited amount. There was a viable group of people trying to run after that fruit, so it wasn't always possible to get fruit, etc. But it was always a very fun taste, and the tasting. It was a hand sell for sure, but we never had a problem selling it once somebody tasted it. So your liqueur is fabulous.
Thank you.
It's got all that tartness that one expects and all that deep berry, and of course, but the alcohol does come through and give it just a real stately kind of feel. Just wanted to say that. Just a really lovely cassis.
Thank you very much.
Are you working with any other currant products? And Greg's already mentioned that he's growing some. Are you working with any? No?
Right now, our range of liqueurs are 9 liqueurs. So we start our season with elderflower, rhubarb, white peach, blackberry, nectarine, cranberry, bosk pear, and then our black currant. What really is different with the black currant, so we steep all our liqueurs for about 12 weeks before we press and filter. And when we started pressing our black currants, I turned around and one of our ladies who work with us, I saw her snacking on the pressed currants. And I was like, what are you doing? And because all the fruits, once they have steeped for 12 weeks, it all goes into the liqueurs. When you have a rhubarb, for example, it tastes like nothing. And so I was blown away that the currants, even after steeping for such a long time and after being pressed, still had a texture and so much flavor. So we ended up offering it to different chefs, and they actually did pick them up. So we had some restaurants who started working with them.
One of the people who are not here today that I definitely wanted to mention was a different brewery who's been making black currant now for about 4 or 5 years, which is Subversive in Catskill. And they use only New York currants, and they make a lovely sour currant, and it's fabulous. But it's, again, you're starting to see some of the breweries pick up on this, and I think that's an important point that you bring up.
I just want to pick up on that for a moment. What's interesting, currants are really well known throughout much of the world, except for the United States because of the ban. And they're used extensively throughout Europe. In fact, in England, marrying currants, black currants, with beer products is very famous. You can go into London and get a Guinness in black, and it's Guinness beer and black currant. So you can get a snake bite or a black velvet, and there are different types of ales and whatnot with black currant. So it's really well known throughout all of Europe. It's really where I first came across currants. Was I had a restaurant in Bavaria for a little while, and behind the restaurant were these bushes with red and black berries that I was unfamiliar with, that I learned a little bit later were Schwarz and Johannisbeer and Rot. And it later on became, when I was looking for something and talking with Ben at Clinton Vineyards, a little light went off and I said, I remember these. Yeah, but currants are a really big deal everywhere in the world, and that's why I think people are getting excited about them here in America, because they're so versatile, they're so amazing.
And I've seen a lot of bakers starting to take on the black currants as well. I was just at a bake shop the other day, and they had black currant muffins, and I was like, wow, look at that. It was just hilarious. It was just such coincidence or irony that we were coming to do this, and I went, holy moly, they're really making it out there. Really happy to see that, and you really did change the game, both agriculturally and certainly in the beverage and spirit world.
Thank you, Carlo. I was just going to bring up something really quick when it comes to currants, how they work with other, like you told before, that they will co-ferment with beers. At Hudson Chatham, we had red currants, and we put them actually with raspberries, because what they did was they brightened it up, the raspberries. They added acid naturally, so it actually made the raspberry wines much more complete that way. And there were liqueurs, but they had the acid from the currants. So it was doing that way. So I'm saying currants can be used for many other things when it's making either beers or ciders or blends with other kinds of fruit wines. That's all I was going to say. Thank you. Let's try that one. I didn't try it that's what I'm trying to...
My nose went like that.
Yeah.
No,
It'll burn off. It's too sulfur. That's one. So
these are some of your experimental wines from home.
yeah, they're Casscles, but it's just
It ended out.
What did you use? Use Everclear or use DotE or what?
no. I just if you put the sugar on top,
You add a little water in the
the
middle.
top part basically is always like less than 14%. You slowly build it up to 18%. So
Yep.
just try it out and just do the share. But I got there's a lot of just do that one.
These are red currants.
Yeah, these are red currants and blueberries.
So you have to. Steve has something like. How many varieties of grapes do you have?
Like 87.
Steve has this incredibly experimental thing here.
There's many years. There's lots of confusions. Yeah. So I was bottling. There was confusion. So that's why it was like 2019. It was like question mark, because I was pretty sure, but not 100%. So, yeah. And I was still listen. I have 5 now. So like there's 3 bottles left. So I figured just try that. And this other one will be fine once they solve the verbs. It's fine now. So
It's a little sherry ash, but it's lovely.
the way it gets to 18%, you make a regular wine out of it, and then you put in. I put in different kinds of yeast. Ones that are very fruity, but also do ones that are high. So we've already gets to like say for 14%, the yeast won't live anything higher than 14%. So what you do is you sprinkle sugar on top of it, so the thing that's on top basically has less than 14% sugar. It's still fermenting on the top, and then you mix it up and you keep layering it. So this sat in the skins probably for 4, and then you slowly bring it up. So I didn't test it, but I think it's probably set.
This is also red currant and blueberry.
So there's something different.
I had them, so I figured I'd bring it here. How many people do you have the panel doing currants?
But yeah, we use the red currants for the raspberry one. Just give it a bit more tartness. It's great.
Yeah. The same thing, you just put the blueberries in there and it has the tannins and do that. I don't have a real lot of tannin, but the black currants have tannins, but the reds don't have so much. But you put the blueberries in there because they all come at the same time. Basically, before the birds get in, pick them all up, sit them in there, wait 4 months, then bottom. So
Something a little different.
Moving along from our fermented beverages or distilled beverages, Kevin at Branchwater Farms has regaled me in times past with his currant spirit, and I'll be doing it again here today. Kevin, how was your sojourn, yours and Robin's sojourn, brought you to Currants as one of your bottlings?
I think I totally agree with what Greg said about Americans' lack of familiarity with the fruit. It's something that, at least in the wine business, people talk about currants as a flavor for Bordeaux and a bunch of wines. But the amount of Americans that actually have tasted a currant is pretty slim.
It's like gooseberries.
Exactly. And my first exposure to currants was actually at a restaurant in San Francisco called Zuni, which makes a very famous chicken, where they macerate black currants in red wine vinegar, and they do croutons, and they roast a chicken in a fire, and they serve it over a big salad, and it's one of the best preps for chicken I've ever had. And I tried to replicate it here. And I was at Montgomery Place Orchards, which is a local fruit stand here in Red Hook, and they had dried black currants, which is the first time I'd ever seen that anywhere. You can't find currants in a grocery store, a normal grocery store. And so I asked the owner, where did these currants come from? And they said, you don't know Greg Quinn? You need to meet Greg Quinn. So that's how we met each other. And I reached out to Greg and just said, look, I really want to distill this. It's not a distillate that you see in the United States. It's pretty common in Austria and Poland, what they call it in German, they call it Johannisbeer. So it's a pretty common spirit over there. Not much is imported because when you do distill it, it does produce a little bit more methanol than other fruits. So it's hard to get them past GB formula regulations if you were to submit a sample. But I was curious about it and really wanted to do it. And at the time, we were a young business, so we had gin on the market, and I think we had pear on the market, Bartlett pear on the market. And all the whiskeys and the apple, everything was still aging. So I wanted to produce another clear spirit so we could get it onto the market more quickly. And I didn't realize how much of a diva black currants can actually be. So we did it. I think we bought 5,000 pounds from Greg, and that filled 2 fermentation tanks. We bought them as frozen currants, which is really good for us because it helps us with controlling the fermentation temperature. It's very important that we keep all the fermentations very cool so that we don't lose the aromatics. So starting with the frozen fruit was a good way to go. But it took about 3 weeks for the frozen fruit to come up to temperature to start to ferment, and then it took another 4 weeks for the fruit to ferment. And then after that, the resulting distillate was only 110 liters. So from 5,000 pounds, we received only 110 liters of alcohol at 85.4%. So it's a very low fructose fruit. And fortunately, our distillery was designed by Hans Reisebauer in Austria, and he is a master at fruit distillates. And we have a patented design on this distillery that has a second reflux helmet, which is meant for fruits like black currants, raspberries, any fruit that has low sugar. I can open up that secondary reflux helmet and get another 1.5 to 2% more alcohol by using that system. So it was a perfect match for us. But the original goal of releasing another clear spirit quickly was not realized because it just, as a distillate, it just smelled roots and leaves and bark for the first year. It took a full year of aging in steel before it really came around and the cassis flavor started to come out. So it's a unique distillate. It's the only fruit distillate that we make where I think you taste not just the berry, but the plant itself. You do smell the leaf. It's a very savory style of distillate, where Pear Williams is very, very much like a pear, and apple's very much like an apple. Cherries are very cherry, but currants are not. Currants are a different thing altogether. It's a fascinating berry for me, and it's in line with some other Austrian varieties that I would like to do, like a Rowenberry or an elderberry or something along those lines. Yeah, it's a fascinating fruit, but it's one that we wanted to make because I don't know of another blackcurrant eau de vie in the U.S.
The point you just made, Kevin, about the fructose level being low, I was aware of previously, and this, to me, at least to this point, helped to account for the relatively higher prices one pays for currant spirits anywhere in the world. However, you just mentioned the point about it taking time for it to shed the woodsy qualities and to show the more fruit characteristics. Is that ubiquitous throughout all currant aging or getting to the curranty flavor when you're making a distilled currant product? Is that something that would also help to account for the time it takes to, and therefore the cost it takes to make a quality?
I think when it's macerated, you don't need the time. But I think you would know, Uta, more than I would. But I think when you're macerating it, the flavor and the aroma is really present and very there. When we were fermenting the currants, the whole distillery smelled like currant. It was an amazing aroma. But when it's then distilled up to 85%, it takes a long time to really come back again. So it gets very closed in that distillation process, and then it takes time to open up. And we age everything here. So the gin is aged. Everything here is aged in steel or in oak for a certain period of time. On average, we age pears for 1 year in steel before release. 6 months to a year. Apples are aged for several years. It's more because it's in oak, so I want it to have a little bit more of that depth. Cherries we did for the first time this year. We source all of our fruits here in the Hudson Valley, so we're really blessed to live where we live because there's so much abundance of fruit in this area. So we did English Morello cherries this year. I thought that would take longer than it is. It's really open even at this stage, and we did it in July. So we'll see how long it takes. We just taste every so often, see where they are. And when they start to open up, then we can do them. But you also really need to add water to have the fruit come out. So when we're aging at 85%, it's nearly impossible to taste at that strength. But by adding water, it really opens up. So half of our distillates are water. That's another important thing because we distill only at above 160 proof here.
I think the other important thing is that one of the things about both cassis or a black currant liqueur is that these are great beverages to either add to a cocktail, as we said earlier, or to drink alone. But the most popular, obviously, is a Kir or a Kir Royale. Those are the two most popular to start off with. And I think that's one of the other real exciting parts about black currants. As Greg was saying earlier when we were chatting, you could add even just his juice to a wine or a sparkling wine, and it makes it slightly lower alcoholic cocktail. So there are just so many applications here that are going on, and very excited about this eau de vie.
You can see, I think, in the profile, it's almost agave. That's what I mean a little bit by the savory quality. And we'll make a kind of a version of a margarita with this. So you do lime or lemon, a little bit of simple, and then this black currant eau de vie, and it makes a killer margarita-style cocktail. It's an expensive cocktail.
And is this an easy hand sell for you versus some of the other liqueurs that you make?
It's the most expensive one because of the cost of the fruit. So when we started the farm, we grow all of our own grain here organically, but we felt that we were too old to start orchards, so we're grateful for other farmers in the valley that are doing the orchard and all the other fruits for us. It really depends. Last week we sold over 10 bottles out of the store and at $100 a half bottle. That's good, but then we could go maybe 3 weeks without selling anything. It's one of those, it definitely is a hand sell just because of how unique it is. People know pear and apple and they just don't know black currant. But when they taste it, I think people become interested just because of the story and being able to tell the story about how the logging industry got them banned and how it was decentralized from the Congress in the 80s and how a local hero got the law overturned. It's a hometown story that's fun to tell. And I worked on the town of Milan's natural resource inventory report for over a year that we published last year. And when we went back and talked to old farmers in the area, all of them had currants. Currants were ubiquitous in New York until the ban. And then people still grew them secretly. And when we have people come to the farm store here, people that grew up in the area a long time ago are coming back for the holidays. They'll see the currants because we sell from Greg frozen currants here as well, the dried currants, and they buy them because they just remember them from their childhood.
One of the great things about this podcast, Drinking on the Edge, is that being located here in the middle of the Hudson Valley, sure, I'm 2 hours by train or car to Penn Station or driving through the morass that is New York City and have access to the world passing through it. All the fine wines, spirits, and other fermented beverages that exist out there, but also here locally in the Hudson Valley. Not only are we growing as a venerable agriculture region for these United States, fine fruits, grains, and that can be fermented, distilled into these fine drinks that we taste, but the people who are making them are world class. The quality of the products end up being world class. Why? Because the attention to detail, the history that comes behind them, the people who are working so hard to create them, and the fact that if you're this close to New York City, you got to be a little bit competitive in order to succeed. And I think our two producers of these fermented and distilled products are doing exemplary work in that. Not being a fruit juice expert, I can still say that the CurrantC black currant nectar is absolutely delicious, beautifully balanced. Again, I'm not a juice guy, but if I had to drink a juice, this would be in my top 5, no question. And on the commercial juice, nope, that's excellent. I didn't comment, Uta, about your liqueur, and I've had my share of Crème de Cassis and all the commercial ones around there. There are a couple of decent ones coming out of France that make their way over here, but this has got to be the best one I've ever tasted in the United States. It packs a punch. It is not subtle. It is lots of flavor going on there. For those of you who like intense liqueurs, make your way to this, but be warned, it's not on the sweet side. It's definitely got a strong backbone of tartness to it. I'm sure that was your intent. Present it, but unless you like the real sourness, you're going to want to mix it. But then again, at 21%, it makes a fine mixture if you're going that way. I've said plenty of great things about Kevin's products in the past, but his Currant is absolutely expertly done. I do know my way around spirits, and this is like a beautiful thing. I know Hans Reisenbauer had worked hard to help you get this right, and my God, at $100 for a half bottle, that's $200 for a full bottle. It's a great holiday gift for those people who couldn't afford it, but if you want something that really requires, please don't blend it. Don't make cocktails with it. Unless you're lighting your Cuban cigar with a $100 bill, it's fine. Keep it as it is. It's lovely to sip. Carlo, I know you want to talk a bit. Here you go.
Look, it's an expensive fruit if you're going to be buying it. There's just no question about it. It is labor intensive. I have to tell you, the first time we harvested currants, this woman had put in a whole orchard and she said, well, you can have as much as you want. And I said, how do you harvest this stuff? What's your equipment? And she says, we have none. You'll have to do it by hand. And there is nothing more grotesque than picking black currants by hand. And we had professional harvest guys from some of the local large orchards come out, apple orchards come out. And after one day, they all quit. They were like, yeah, we're not going back out there. That's how hard it is unless you have the proper tools to be harvesting currants. And again, it's a very competitive marketplace right now because there's just not enough to fill all the wants that are out there. For those people who are making products, whether you're making a liqueur or you're making an eau de vie, it's an expensive product. It's the cost to these folks that makes it. On the other hand, they're unique products, and you're going to pour this for friends or family, and they're going to be just knocked out because there's nothing like this. And again, this is artisan stuff, as David pointed out, and that's really what it's all about. I think the other shout out I want to give is to Cooper's Daughter, which is another Hudson Valley producer, just to say they also make one. So there are little producers all over the valley that are making really good product, and across the state, people are trying to do more and more with currants. And again, it's all due to Greg, so it's really all about.
Just piqued my curiosity. Is the generation of currants really a Hudson Valley or New York sort of thing, or is it going on in other states as well, Greg?
In fact, New York State was the largest grower of currants prior to the 1911 ban in the country. They were mainly red currants. The bulk of them were red currants. As you can imagine, back in the late 1800s, people weren't talking about antioxidants and anthocyanins and health food for that matter. Health food was something you ate 3 times a day. But red currants specifically, were a big deal. And people grew the black, and of course there were a lot of, as Steve mentioned earlier, there were a lot of wild black currants there. It's one of the things that I actually, when I was speaking after I spoke with Steve and Bill Larkin, Senator Larkin, about moving forward with this thing, I went up to Albany and met with a couple of assembly people and took them out to the woods outside of Albany and showed them where there were wild currants and 5-needle pine, white pine, living in proximity, and everybody was getting along. And the law was really aggressive. So yeah, there's wild currants out there, don't lend themselves to commercial harvesting. And as you were saying, Carlo, one of the big problems with currants is harvesting. And currants grow on the inside of the bush, so you don't go down like a blueberry and just pick them off, or even a high bush blueberry, which is easier.
Blueberries, they were easy.
Easy, yeah. And currants, you've got to bend over, you've got to part the bush. And of course, you pick the currants when they're ready to fall, when the abscission layer between the berry and the branch is formed, and they're ready to come off. So when you part that bush, you'll pick 10 and 15 will fall on the ground. And we did that for about 4 or 5 years in the beginning, and then I ended up importing a Polish black currant harvester, which is a life game changer. That's a machine, not a person. It's a machine, yes, exactly. Which states is it still illegal? I think there's 5 or maybe 6 states. First of all, you can't grow currants much below the Mason-Dixon line because they need 1,000 hours a year below freezing temperatures. And so it's pretty much a temperate climate, northern fruit. And there's still Massachusetts, you can't legally grow them. I think Virginia, there's about 5 states. And the only reason for that is that originally, as I said, it was a federal ban. And then they kicked it to states' jurisdiction in the 60s because it just wasn't a thing. And they felt that FBI didn't need to follow up on currant growers any longer. And so they just gave it to most states. And most states took the law as written and put it in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet. And that was the end of that. So in those 5 states, they are still legal only because no one's really picked up the baton and gotten the law changed.
Any plans, Uta, Kevin, to grow any of your own currants? Uta's shaking her head no.
We'll have some in the backyard just for our own consumption. Because we grow pears and apples just for our own consumption, but it's similar to what we're doing in the distillery, but not on a commercial level.
Anybody else getting into the production side of things that you've heard about? I want to share, either in the crop production or the beverage production. Besides Carlos, haven't mentioned subversive. No.
I was going to point out actually some other benefits about growing currants is that they don't mind really bad soil. They'll take clay soils, heavy soils, and generally when you grow fruit or anything, you don't want to put anything at the bottom of the hill because that's where the frost tends to lie, that's where the cold air goes and it kills things. Currants don't mind that. So they don't mind frost, they don't mind the low areas, they don't mind wet areas, they don't mind that at all. When it comes to the labor of picking currants, I just know I'm a big fan of music composer Aaron Copland, and I wrote his biography once, and basically as a kid, weird family. From this standpoint is that what they did was the farmers in Marlborough would convince the family of Aaron Copland to come up. So they used to stay on vacation in July and pick currants. So it's just the funniest thing in the world that this guy who was like a very famous composer, basically, what do you do? I worked in Marlborough and I picked currants, and that was in his biography. So it must have instilled something, this memory about picking these things, and it probably wasn't the greatest thing either way. But I'm saying there's other pluses about growing currants as far as those areas of the farm that you can't grow anything else, you can grow currants.
Worth noting. Anybody want to add anything else before we call it a wrap? Listen, thank you for coming to this episode at Drinking On the Edge, hosted here by Kevin Pike at Branchwater Farms. First of all, Greg Quinn, thank you. Uta Londrigan, thank you. And Steve Casscles, thank you. And to my co-host, Carlo DeVito, thanks for helping to make this happen. Everybody, look for these current products here and look for these current products on the shelves and then on the websites. And the websites are?
HeimatNY.com. HEIMATNY.com.
And?
Branchwater Farms with an S.com.
Thanks you all for... and for the juice.
CurrantC, CurrantC.com.
Oh, that was easy. Thank you all for drinking on the edge.